Good evening to all who are present in this auditorium, as well as those watching on Facebook Live. As I acknowledge the protocol that has already been established. It is good to see all of you here as we engage in this very justified and warranted forum. I was asked to speak on the migration experience from a development standpoint, and I'll admit here that initially I wanted to opt out, and I look over to Dr. Natalio Wheatley, because he knows what I'm talking about. And that was mainly because I was out of academics for about 8 years or so. But I've now returned, and it's a heartwarming experience. And I am indeed humbled tonight to be sitting on this stage with many of my former colleagues at this college, who I have had great admiration for over the years as I was coming into academics. So I hope that I do justice to this thought-provoking topic which has been placed upon me. Sometime between 2005 and 2007, I would have engaged in research looking at the statistical review of globalization in the Virgin Islands. This research was presented at the Islands of the World Conference in 2008, which was in South Korea. And then it was further refined and shaped and published in a book entitled Moving from Infancy to Young Adulthood, a contemporary review of the development of the Virgin Islands in 2013. This study reviewed how globalization impacted the BVI in the context of sustainable development, and it primarily reviewed the economic perspective of globalization as it showed the relationships among various dimensions, in particular the legal and political dimension, the social and cultural dimension, as well as the technological dimension. Given the nature of globalization, it was determined back then that the appropriate method to reach the objective of the study would have been to review the data, which was already collated from the various government agencies, and to further process that data to ascertain how the BVI was impacted by globalization. The data collected for that study included records on the Virgin Islands history, GDP statistics, tourism statistics, financial services statistics, population statistics, and the application for development statistics. From the data analysis, several salient points emerged. First, it was determined that globalization is not a new phenomenon in the BVI. These islands over time went through various changes in government and legislation. Significant pieces of legislation influencing the economic and social face of the territory were the Hotel Ordinance Act of 1953, the IBCA of 1984, which was replaced by the BVI Business Act of 2004 and the Financial Services Commission Act 2002. Other more recent chief forms of legislation for the BVI were the 2007 Constitution and the 2010 Labor Code. Second, the tourism sector was assessed as the highest contributor to GDP, while the financial services sector provided the highest contribution to revenue based on statistics between 2006 and 2008. These sectors, coupled with the practices of BVI landers migrating overseas between the 1960s and the 1970s, led to the large influx of expatriates. Third, the BVI should be mindful of the recent world events encompassing the declining US dollar and the emerging economies of countries like, and it would have been back then, Dubai, Brazil, India, and China, and the new emerging currencies. And in response, the study would have ascertained that the BVI should contemplate a couple things. One, the building of an international airport and a 5-star hotel to increase infrastructural capacity, to embrace multiple currencies, to ensure the survival of the tourism and financial sectors, and to market its tourism product towards the South American and European regions. And these options should, of course, be studied with sustainable development principles and practices in mind. Fourth, the BVI population has been growing at a rate of 3% between 2001 and 2007. Before that, in 1834, there was an estimated population of 5,500 persons. Then in 1980, the census counted a population of 12,034 persons. And in 1991 census, it showed a population of 16,115 persons. And then in 2007, the population was calculated at 27,518, approximated to 28,000. And I think we know by now that the population is pretty much over 30,000 individuals. So the BVI population saw growth at a rate, as I said before, of 3% between 2001 and 2007. And again, that growth would have been primarily because of the importation of labor. Between 2001 and 2007, the expatriate to local population ratio was estimated at 66 to 34% in favor of expatriates. So that's 66% against 34% locals. The ethnic composition of blacks, or to be politically correct, persons of colored origin. The ethnic composition of blacks to other races was approximately 82% during that same period. The BVI had an active working population, which was estimated at 69% between 2003 and 2007. And the mean age of the population was 31 years old during that period. So the average person residing in the BVI was in the range of their 30s, which is quite young. Accordingly, these statistics tend to underscore some of the past initiatives to protect the local population from marginalization through instruments, legal instruments. And these results as well dismiss the possibilities that there would have been an aging population in the BVI. And then finally, another interesting statistic was that the ratio male to female was almost even, which I found very interesting. And that is very different to other populations globally. The BVI's advancement in the tourism and financial sectors has therefore prompted the need for more professionals to be employed in both private and public sectors. And to date, within political leadership, the immigrant population has not necessarily been able to penetrate the representation within the House of Assembly. Government ministries and departments can hire expatriate labor to work at both senior and junior levels with the expertise that cannot be found locally. The demand for expatriates is largely to supply the BVI labor market with skilled labor and not unskilled labor. So that observation needs to be made. And the entrance of more expatriates into the BVI raises the question also of carrying capacity. As more residents and more tourists demand more resources from the territory, this will in turn place pressures on the physical, social, and economic resources of the islands. It cannot be disputed that the population makeup between or within the last 50 to 60 years is very different from the population makeup within the BVI today. In fact, it can be summarized that the economic advancement has impacted the society both positively and negatively. Fifth, the study found that the BVI has benefited from technological systems and networks over time. These systems and networks need improvements to remain in stride with the fundamental requirements to support the tourism and financial services sectors. There also seems to be some displacement of local businesses as the telecommunications market becomes more liberalized and foreign telecommunication companies enter the market. Also, the BVI has encountered a vast increase in the development projects within the past 10 years, which has affected the economy positively, while at the same time impacting the natural resources in some ways negatively. Simply put, the high demand for development has been threatening the territory's carrying capacity, and the warning signs are evident with the strains on the water system, electricity, and traffic resources. To address these challenges, further decentralization of resources to other sister islands or underdeveloped areas on Tortola should be continued. There are numerous matters that can be taken into consideration when looking at globalization within the Virgin Islands. There can be no surprise, therefore, of how tourism and financial sectors have transformed the development of the BVI. And this transformation of the islands has been for the better, but in some instances, the social, cultural, and demographic base for the islands has been disfigured by the impacts of globalization. The consensus must therefore be that the BVI is a small island representation of a global village and continues to grapple with the constantly changing global economic environment. Now, there's a second paper that I would have embarked upon entitled "The Relevance of CARICOM's Existence to the Virgin Islands in the Context of Globalization." And it's interesting that my presentation flows like this, following Dr. Smith, Dr. Turnbull, and then Najan did her little thing. So this paper, "The Relevance of CARICOM's Existence of the Virgin Islands in the Context of Globalization," it was first presented at the Islands of the World Conference in 2010, which was in Denmark. And I was just chatting with Dr. Dawson to remind him that next year is actually 10 years since the BVI hosted that conference here at the college. And perhaps there's a need for us to organize something to remember that, that opportunity that we were granted. And this paper was also published in the Chinese Business Review in December 2011. The purpose of the study was to consider the relevance of CARICOM's existence to the BVI. And one of the things that the paper found, that the CARICOM's relevance becomes most significant to the BVI and the Caribbean by extension when the globalization phenomena is applied. The study would have proceeded with a SWOT analysis given the nature of CARICOM's past challenges, having derived data from face-to-face interviews. And from that research, it was determined that the Caribbean must make conclusive decisions on CSME and its future, and to provide greater opportunity for the initiative, as there's still value in the CARICOM ideal, and how successful this ideal becomes will depend on that vision being articulated to the people of the Caribbean. There is need for the Caribbean to find their commonalities between their territories and use these commonalities to advance CARICOM's initiatives. In the same vein, CARICOM should consider extending Caribbean negotiations for international trade and economic development to the level of the Americas, so that the advantages of a larger market could be realized. The study concluded that while the BVI remains only, and you can correct me, Najan, is it an associate member still? Yes. And not of CSME. Right. So it remains an associate member of CARICOM and not of CSME. It still has an interest in the progress of the regional grouping and its trade initiatives. Regrettably, CARICOM has been struggling with its identity as a unified grouping for several years. Yet, to combat the liberalization of markets processes, the grouping must find that interconnection amongst its nations to advance its agenda on the global stage. Accordingly, it has been recommended that CARICOM begin to focus on its strengths and opportunities for economic development across the region to occur. It is also advised that more serious consideration be taken towards the development of a comprehensive regional market for the trading of goods and services, and that is basically the essence of CSME. The two studies referred to above were conducted more than 10 years ago, and it is satisfying to see that this work, even though it was 10 years ago, is very, very relevant still today. And much of it came out in the other presentations that came before. And this is what research basically is supposed to engage and allow to happen, where you look beyond the then and now, and you provide the insights of the possible ways forward. And so I'm grateful again for the opportunity to speak on tonight's forum, and I turn it back over to Najan.